Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of our podcast, MusicaliTea. And this is a podcast where we dive into the lives of composers and discuss tea that they had in their lives. I'm Joycelyn.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're going to be talking about one of the most known composers of band literature, Percy Grainger. And we're going to be discussing some of his hobbies.
Before we start, we'd like to provide a quick trigger warning. This podcast will contain mature themes, including discussions surrounding sexual themes, racism, as well as references to suicide. It is crucial to approach this content with an open mind, respect for boundaries, and an understanding of consent. Thank you for your understanding, and we hope that you find value, education, and respectful insights within the episodes of this podcast.
And as usual, all of our sources can be found on our website at musicalitypodcast.com if you want to fact check us or just learn more information about anything we're talking about.
So before we get into the tea, we need to give a brief summary of who was Percy Grainger.
So George Percy Grainger was born in 1882 in Australia, and he was an only child. His dad was an architect, and his mom, I don't know what she did, but his family...
History never keeps up with the mothers.
Oh my gosh! Well, the thing about it is his dad was an architect, but he left them. So he went back home to London. And even when he came back to Australia, he still ain't lived with his family. So, you know.
To be fair, we know everything we need to know.
Right. But I would have liked to know what his mama did. Anyways, his family knew from an early age, though, that he would be an artist. And they provided him with a formal education to cultivate his craft.
By the age of 13, Grainger was already performing in public concerts. He then went on to study music in Germany, where he further honed his skills as a pianist and composer. In fact, his first composition was a birthday gift for his mother and dates from 1893. Now, once he was done with his education, he moved to London, and there he published so much music and also gained conducting skills, as well as further his virtuosic pianist skills. He and his mom suddenly left for the US in 1914, which could have been caused by World War I going on at the time. And he joined the US Army as a bandsman in June 1917, which, if you find pictures online, you'll see Grainger holding the saxophone the only way that you really should hold a saxophone.
I know, it's his, like, you got to make sure that the mouth strap, or the mouth strap, what am I talking about? You have to make sure the mouthpiece.
Saxophone.
Yeah, tell us, please, because I don't know how to play saxophone, so.
I was just saying, the way he holds the neck is just kind of cool. It's very like, I don't know that he actually played the saxophone. That's always been an ongoing joke in saxophone circles, is that he didn't really know how to play, but he loved the sound of the saxophone.
I do think, I think the saxophone is one of the easiest instruments to get a sound out of. So technically, if he's holding a saxophone in the band and he produced a sound, he is playing the saxophone.
You can put the mouthpiece upside down and like not even have everything in all the way, and it will still make a sound.
Literally. Not like the flute, though. I know all about that.
Anyway, he was discharged from the Army in January of 1919, and Grainger then embarked on what was perhaps the most flamboyant decade of his career.
Yeah, so starting off the 20s kind of early, his mother committed suicide. And we're actually going to talk more about this later, but some of the causes might have been due to, there were rumors circulating that both Percy Grainger and his mother Rose were in an incestuous relationship, and she also had syphilis as well. So after his mother's death, he took 2 tours back to Australia. The first one in 1924 to visit his family, and then the second one that he did in 1926 on the way home back to America, he actually ended up meeting his future wife, a Swedish-born poet and painter, Ella Viola Strom. I don't know if I said that right, but she was Swedish, so, you know. And they actually got married at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles in 1928 in front of 20,000 people.
If you would like to read more on Grainger's biography, you can read more from the Percy Grainger Society at percygrainger.america.org.
Now into the juicy tea. I'm so excited. So that was the story of his life as told by the Percy Grainger Society. But we know that there was so much more going on than that. And actually, like a really quick thing before we get into the real crazy stuff, in addition to being a composer and virtuosic pianist and conductor, homie designed his own clothes. Like, Percy was a fashion designer.
So
And
innovative too.
Granger designed his own clothes from towels, which is pretty interesting. You can actually find pictures of this online. Just search up Percy Grainger fashion designer and you'll see what we're talking about. And he also invented what we would consider a forerunner to the modern day sports bra as well.
I just wonder what prompted that.
Right. Like,
There's not like a picture of him wearing the Forerunner.
no, I could not find a picture
Oh,
of him wearing the forerunner. Only like
okay.
the towel. I don't
Yeah.
honestly, it was given like toga, like you know how like you have like toga days. That's what it was kind of given to
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Like a frat party kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty, I mean, considering what we about to get into the rest of his life, I think he would definitely be into
Pretty
modern
tame.
day frat parties for sure. So, making a shift now though into like the actual reason we even made this episode, like it was even brought to our mind in addition to us both being band kids, it's just that, Granger has some very interesting hobbies for sure. Now, Granger today is what we would consider a sadomasochist, and just like a brief Google definition of that is a person who derives pleasure, often of a sexual nature, from the infliction of physical or psychological pain on another person or on oneself. So it's basically giving Christian Grey, if you're familiar with 50 Shades of Grey.
His sexuality was a part of his identity that caused him so much agony and a lot of harsh self-judgment that were both affected due to the societal perspectives of the time. Again, because this was before sadomasochism really had a name, or that people who had these tendencies or these lifestyles were truly identified. Again, causing agony not only for him, but also for his mother, as they sort of navigated this very complex relationship. She traveled with him everywhere, which wasn't crazy because his father wasn't exactly in the picture, but due to massive rumors swirling at the time, it had really bad effects for both of them.
It did. She would go as far to terrorize any woman who was interested in her son, and she would use emotional blackmail on him. And so, despite these rumors that they had an incestuous relationship, Rose did avoid all physical contact with Percy because she had syphilis. But what is really interesting is when she died in 1922, some of the contents in her handbag, what she left him, included a lock of her hair, and the note that she left was signed, "Your poor, insane mother." These practices for him started as early as 16, but there's actually a quote of him saying, "Did my cruel joy, which shows itself in both wishing to give pain and to take it, arise from the whippings my mother gave me from the earliest childhood up to 14 or 15? Maybe it did. And if that is the case, I must feel doubly thankful to her for having given me life's greatest boon." So, Granger's even earliest introduction into these practices was from whippings his mama gave him. So, you know, there was definitely something going on there that would not be considered a usual mother son relationship, considering he would be further up in age at this point. But when he was 18, he actually did visit Amsterdam, and he discovered an underworld of BDSM, and he's found like a lot of different books and photographs. He really found a sense of community, and that made him feel a little bit better about himself, because he did realize he wasn't the only sadomasochist in the world.
And it's, maybe I'm definitely looking at it with like a 21st century, I almost forgot what century we're in.
We are
Definitely
in the
with a
21st century.
definitely with a 21st century perspective, but like TikTok is one of those things that has connected people like all over the world, right? So many
Mhm.
people use it. And then you have your For You page. And I feel like Granger would have found his people.
Yeah, he would have found his people, because I mean, I think all of us, like anytime, in the TikTok comment sections or any social media platform, and people are like, "Oh, I've never had a single unique experience in my life." I just feel like humans have always been the same throughout all of time. Like, yes, we're
Mhm.
different. Yes, there are definitely different circumstances, but in the end, we all think the same because we're all human beings. So it is
Well,
kind of nice to know, like, typically, if you feel some way, you're never the only person in the world that feels that way, even if it may feel like it.
that's so true.
Yeah, so I mean, that would be today though. He did not have social media back then, right? So he definitely did still feel, really guilty about it. And he even said, quote, the core of me, my inner self, my senses have stayed like those of a child that knows he's naughty and looks to be punished for it. I cringe and quail because of my awareness of my evils, the evil deeds I have done, and the far more evil thoughts I feel within my bosom. There were some composers in the time that seem to also be a part of this community. For example, the Austrian composer George Friedrich Haas, he spoke about spending years repressing his urges before publicly coming out as a practicing dominant to his submissive wife. And he felt the influence on his music to have been a positive one. He said, quote, maybe it's easier now to do what I want because I'm not disturbed by my unfulfilled desires.
It's
Go
very
ahead.
interesting too. He would leave so much of this like with diaries, and of course we'll get into more of that later as far as how he documented these things. But to know just how much like inner turmoil he had as a composer, because some composers keep track of that, or at least we don't find out about it until after the fact. Whereas
Right.
Granger, he had everything, and then you listen to his music and it's a total 180.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into the music because I will say for me growing up, when I first heard about all of Granger's life and the things he went through, I was very shocked because you don't necessarily get a feel of that in his music on a surface level. The reason we know these things about Granger, it did not come from secondary sources. Like homie documented everything. So
He documented so many aspects of his life, including his sex life being very thoroughly documented. Um, I think he was anticipating a world that would one day be ready, which I think the 21st century would be that time where people are
right.
very open about these aspects of their lives. But he wanted to start this museum about his life. He sent in more than 40,000 items of correspondence, things like shopping lists, vegetarian recipes, and a collection of more than 80 whips, some made from recycled conductor's batons. And he wanted a
I'm sorry,
skeleton.
that's not funny. I just like processed what that was. Recycled conducting batons into whips.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
used they must have been made out of different things back then.
Yeah, mine
Because
is
I
made
don't
out of plastic now, so or is it wood? I don't know what my thing. I don't know what my baton is made out of. I'll have to get into that. I'll have to look into
this is such a different tangent. It's like, could mine be made in never mind. He even wished for his skeleton to be placed in the museum, but was refused on grounds of public decency.
Yeah, Granger wanted his whole life on display. He wanted people to know what was going on. Like
On his bones.
he did, they
Like,
did. And the thing about it, I really appreciate him documenting because this for the simple fact we're still playing all of his music later. It was a fairly easy search for us to find all of this stuff out
yeah,
about his life. Um, and I just wanted to say, like, as we were uncovering things, I had to keep in mind how you mentioned earlier, we kind of tend to view things from a 21st century mindset. But, people back then were different to some extent, and no one was necessarily one way. Nothing was ever super black or white. And so for me, as an African American woman, if you're not watching us on YouTube, I am a black woman. But I wanted to know, I was like, but was he racist? Like I just have to ask that question. Anytime I see a composer put on my stand before like 1990, I'm like, but were they like, how did they feel about black people, right? And so that led me into this huge deep dive, and I'm just going to lay out facts as they were presented to me. But basically Granger's racial idea was this idea of the Nordic, um and it had in parentheses, quote, a blue-eyed English. And so he wrote in a letter actually in 1939, and of course this is around the time that Hitler was starting to take over Germany. He said, quote, "From a Nordic standpoint, we Nordics are all sane, and all the rest, in that they are greedy and fight-minded, are insane. And all the rest of the insane breeds agreed with us up to the point that they want to inhabit our countries and want to hold the jobs created by our sanity." Yeah, it was kind of rough for me, because then, even continuing to read on, when Granger moved to America, he lived in Chicago during a time, and he taught Black students, and he actually went as far to protest with African American students on racial injustices.
It's interesting too that he advocated for the music of Duke Ellington at a time when many in the classical music world, especially America, regarded jazz with suspicion.
Which is crazy,
And
because jazz music
right.
is like what put America on the map, but it's okay. Music wise.
Right. Well, exactly. And it's interesting that I think, especially as performers, and we're regarding a lot of things with a 21st century lens, but as performers, it's really important things to know, especially as far as how far we'll go in terms of like separating the art from the artist. I feel like, especially these days, that's a really huge topic.
Right.
Is how much do we want to separate like Grainger's music from himself when you're regarding his own personal politics?
When you're performing composers from like hundreds of years ago, some information does get lost. Some information falls out of, oral transmission. Because I will say, like, I'm not saying my band director shouldn't have been telling me about the BDSM and stuff like that. But, I would have liked to known his motivations for his music as well. And as we get into his music, you'll see what we're saying. But a lot of the reason he chose to write the pieces he chose is because he wanted to document and uphold this Nordic racial ideas. Very gray. It's a very gray area.
So many of, I think, Grainger's most well-known pieces rely heavily on folk songs. And then that kind of changes the definition of like what we consider to be folk songs as well, especially if you consider someone who's, a white composer, or someone from, the Anglo-Saxon white European tradition, like taking folk songs from different groups of people. And then at what point is it appreciation versus appropriation?
Right. And
I think that's
a whole we can really get into that if we wanted to.
It comes up a lot with Grainger.
It's a whole, oh my gosh. Yeah. So now I'm shifting more so into like a brief musical analysis. Now that we've told you basically a lot of this tea that Grainger had going on, how does this spill over into the music that he wrote, right? And I mentioned earlier how after I learned all of this stuff about him, I was like, whoa, that does not sound like Grainger. Like, that does not sound like his music. Okay, pause, And now we're going to talk about it, because we're both band kids. We both played tons of Grainger between the both of us. So
yes, I've heard of Children's March. Like with a lot of Grainger pieces, it's like I've heard of them, like I know the titles, but I just never listened to them. And then I listened to Children's March, and it made me upset because I've never gotten to play it, and it just sounds like a piece that I would enjoy playing. But then reading about this piece, I got a lot of bit of context from windrep.org, which is a really great resource if you're trying to find any sort of information about wind band literature. But as far as Children's March, so we've already talked about like the angst of Grainger's life, and it's so different than what Children's March sounds like, because you're like, oh, it's so upbeat, and it sounds like children actually like having a good time. And so according to the notes on windrep.org, it said that Children's March was dedicated to, quote, my playmate beyond the hills, which was believed to be a Scandinavian woman named Karen Holton, that Windrep thought it was super important to note that she was like really fine, because it said she was a Scandinavian beauty. And I was like,
it's that Nordic racial idea.
I was like, okay, so it was his type. But it also said that Grainger corresponded with her for 8 years, and they didn't end up getting married because his mother, Rose, was jealous. Anyway, Children's March is really fun. It's very woodwind heavy, which a lot of Grainger's music tends to be that way. but I could especially hear a lot of saxophone in it. So it was a very pleasant surprise because I haven't heard that piece. And it was originally for not two hands. It was for four hands, two piano.
I get your drift.
Imagine playing that with two hands. Oh,
crazy. God. Yeah, I played Children's March in high school, actually. That was one of the ones we played. And the singing in it is definitely, well, anytime you have to get band kids to sing, it's going to be,
it becomes a journey.
It
definitely becomes a unit in itself.
Woodwinds never want to sing. It's always brass that's like, oh, they're so into it. But woodwinds, we're like, if we have to sing or stand, absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, it does use what WinRep refers to as being a folk tune, but it was originally composed by Grainger. So he essentially wrote what he perceived to be like a folk tune, but it was original. He didn't take it from other sources the same way that he did with like Lincolnshire Posy.
Right. And we're going to talk about Lincolnshire Posy, but the piece I listened to, it was kind of hard for me to find a piece I hadn't heard by Grainger because let me tell you, I've played so much of him. I just listened to his music, like whole Grainger playlist, a whole bunch of stuff. But I did find a piece and it's called The Warriors, which he wrote in 1913. And I was reading that it requires 3 conductors to hold it all together. I will say, when I heard this piece, I wasn't really following along with the score, but I didn't really see the need for 3 conductors. But Grainger did a lot of like really extra things where he had really huge instrumentations. Like he really wanted to be an innovator in a way. So it doesn't surprise me he would come up with some piece to have 3 conductors that would be necessary. But to me, it didn't sound like typical Grainger. Granted, this is in 1913, so what we would normally play came after the fact, I think, at this point, in more the Lincolnshire and Posy era. But because The Warriors, when I was listening to it, it reminded me so much of Gershwin's American in Paris, which came after the fact, because American in Paris was in the 20s, right? I think it was in the 20s. Mm-hmm. So I was like, there wasn't like a folk tune melody necessarily that kept coming up that was very strophic in a way like a lot of his other pieces was. So even like we've been saying this whole time, okay, Grainger's music doesn't sound like Grainger's life to us, but Lincolnshire Posy, I think, does.
Yes. And Lincolnshire Posy, like when you listen to it start to finish, you feel like you've lived Grainger's life.
I'm maybe not exactly say that.
Maybe not. Not.
I would say you can feel some of that agony, I will say.
Agony.
Yeah.
Agony. Yeah.
Sorry.
Is that from something?
That's from Into the Woods.
Oh, Chris Pine. I thought it was from Our Town.
Oh, absolutely. Listen. No.
Because it sounded like the
Emily. This is the opera I just played at school. It's Ned Rorem. No, that was Agony is from Into the Woods with Chris Pine. Agony.
I haven't seen that.
Like a silence of grief. I don't know the words. And he like ripped open his shirt. Okay, sorry. Back to the topic at hand. But Grainger wrote, Fierceness is a keynote of my music. The object of my music is not to entertain, but to agonize. And I would say in the case of Lincolnshire Posy, I would say the audience probably feels that agony, and certainly the performers feel that agony as well.
The woodwind players.
Oh my gosh. The 4th movement. I was just playing this at a conducting workshop, and I played Lincolnshire Posy before, so I don't know how I allowed myself to forget this, but the 4th movement, Brisk Young Sailor, starts as a really nice lilting upbeat tune, sailor going wherever sailors go. I don't know. But then it's like halfway down the page, woodwinds have all these septuplets, no places to breathe. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Time to sight read.
The saxophone part on that movement is like pretty easy.
Yeah, it's flutes and clarinets have it. I'm a flute player, by the way, guys. Flutes and clarinets have it the worst. Granted, it is a B flat major, a whole bunch of B flat major arpeggios, but it's just like the lack
still like
of
a
places
killer.
to breathe.
Well, it's that entire movement where everybody's just kind of chilling, right? Because it's like, oh, Brisk Young Sailor. Like, it's just kind of a fun one. And then you see like all the flutes and clarinets get like at the edge of their seat and they start kind of like maybe take one last sip of water.
And then also you can see
So funny.
agony in the second movement.
Mhm.
Well, the second movement, I meant to say the fifth movement, Lord Melbourne. It's in 3
Yeah.
time and it's pretty much a brass fanfare. Woodwinds can kind of be chilling there, but you know, you see some really crazy dynamic markings. Like, I think, does that one have the quadruple forte or is it just the triple forte?
Yeah.
I'm not
I think
sure.
it's that one that has the quadruple forte at the end.
Yes. It's like, first of all, never tell a trombone to play anything louder than a forte, if you ask me.
Quadruple.
Quadruple forte. They're like, okay, I got it. So it's
like,
very heavy, very haughty, I guess. And I've done. We can do a whole podcast episode in itself on Lincoln Chart Posey, so I don't want to like get too much into it, but it is definitely a standard for a reason.
So at this point in the podcast, we should probably talk about Grainger's death.
Yes, we should. Sorry.
He died in New York.
I am not laughing because of that.
It was just a weird transition. We're talking about how great Lincoln Posey is. We're like, oh, Lincoln Posey, Grainger's version. And then we're like, oh, okay. He died in New York.
Why do you do that? You always say something as like whatever version, like Taylor Swift, Grainger's version. Like, yes. Yes. But sorry, go ahead. How did Grainger die?
Grainger died in New York in 1961, having fought cancer for nearly a decade. He was buried in Adelaide, Australia, despite his request to have his body preserved and put on display in the museum he had established for himself in the 1930s at the University of Melbourne.
Yeah, I don't know. I really would like to know the thought process on him wanting to have his body preserved. Like, I really, really wish I could ask him.
I want to know what the museum staff reacted like.
They were like, no, we're not gonna do that.
Like, sorry, mate, we can't do that for you. And then did he just walk out? Like, was it a letter? Okay. Did he go in person? I feel like that's like an in-person meeting.
He probably wrote a letter considering he like lived in America, I would say though too.
It's kind of a strange letter to open too. They were probably like, oh, it's just junk mail. And then they open it and they're like, oh.
But I mean, I guess because he was sending him so many artifacts, like still, like, you know, he was sending him his whips and
they had to know what was coming.
They got to.
This man is sending you his shopping list. Like, something is coming out of this.
I respect it. He was an icon. He was trying to be an icon. He was like, y'all are gonna remember me.
I want to know the vegetarian recipes that he sent.
Well, I was reading, and one of the articles I had came across, he actually, so one of his friends, I think in London maybe, was a vegetarian, and he would always like make fun of him for being a vegetarian. He was like, yeah, like obnoxiously eating meat around him and stuff. And
That's
then
terrible.
He just became a vegetarian himself. So
maybe we include like a section for like vegetarian recipes. Grainger's version.
We should. I always consider myself a vegetarian until I eat chicken.
You're like, I'm a vegetarian until I pass a hot wing place, because that's when it changes.
I'm never gonna say no to wings. Like, come on.
No, it's totally the same for me. And my family's like, you want to go to Buffalo Wild Wings? And I'm like, yeah.
Yes. I would like lemon pepper extra wet. Thank you.
Oh,
mild with lemon pepper sprinkle. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
The Atlanta is showing.
Yeah, maybe we should just include like a hot wing recipe instead. Yeah. Our version. I don't know. There's this little shack where I live that they do. I think they're literally called Wing Shack, but it's not like a chain wing shack. It's called like, it's literally like a little shack that you walk up to. It's like by the Ace Hardware or something. but it's like really good wings. Yeah. It's questionable. I mean, I don't know where their permit is, because usually like restaurants have it like hanging up where you can see.
It's the law.
They don't have that thing hanging up. And in the little shack, we can cut this part out. I don't want these people to get gone. Just cut out the, like, put like a beep over where I say the title.
Yes, we don't want to put them on blast.
Yeah, because I don't want them to get shut down. Their wings are too good.
Yeah.
But they always have like 50 people in that kitchen.
Interesting.
I don't know how we got on the wings.
I must try it. Next time I come visit, I'm going to go try some wings from Wing Shack.
It is good.
But yeah, so listen, Grainger, crazy guy, goofy dude, really. Oh, and I did want to mention, this is a rumor, I'm not sure, but I've seen it several different places, that when Grainger died, his dying words to his wife Ella was, "You're the only one that I like."
The only one?
That's what he said, allegedly. So I don't know. That's interesting to me because, we're in such a social profession, we couldn't really do our jobs as musicians without other musicians. So
yeah,
that's the only one. But I think considering he had all of these like deep, dark desires, and he wasn't necessarily super open with them until like after he got ready to die and was sending stuff to University of Melbourne and everything. Like, I guess very few people in his life knew how he actually was. And I'm sure like his wife, obviously, because she would be doing stuff with him. So
and she would probably know, I think, a little bit more as far as behind the scenes in terms of, especially if she actually got to get married to him versus, his mother chasing off every single woman.
Right. I mean, yeah, they didn't get married till after his mother died. So yeah. He did go down. He was definitely recognized for his music and other things in his life. Like, we are still talking about it almost 100 years after his death. That is not almost 100. He died in the 60s. But you get what I'm saying. 100 years after he was like composing music. So
yes. The play?
Yeah, the play.
Oh, or the movie Passion, the story of Percy Grainger, a 1999 Australian drama film.
Now, I will say with the Passion movie, I tried to go find a rating for that and I didn't. So do not say, well, Joycelyn told me to go watch this movie, and no,
yeah,
I did not tell you to do that. There's no
saying.
rating. And this movie is really based on the rumors of incest with his mother. So, do with that.
Gonna have to take that for what that is.
Right. But the play that came out in 1982 is called A Whip Round for Percy Grainger.
We can leave that one there too, because
yeah,
I wonder when the last time that play like only performed in 1982, or is it like? I mean, it's not like on Broadway.
I have no idea because it was produced in Melbourne, and I don't know. I don't know anything like how popular is this movie, because in America,
how popular is
no one knows it exists, but how popular
is it? Because like, how like a lot of plays have like junior versions that like middle schoolers can do. Like,
I guarantee
you have like this one where they have like something junior.
Annie Junior.
Yeah, like any like middle school play. I doubt they have this, but that'd be weird.
I guarantee you they don't. They don't. Anyways, that is today's episode. That's the first episode. We created a playlist of some of our favorites from Graingers, including the pieces we're talking about today, if you want to go and listen to them as well. So we hope you learned a little bit more about the life of Percy Grainger, and we implore you to go listen to his music and familiarize yourself with him if you're not already, because he is a really cool guy. I think a little weird, but cool, and that's why we're talking about him later. If he wasn't weird or cool, nobody would care. Like, respect. So any last words, Sarah?
Tune in next time for our second episode where we talk about Bach, the criminal. Dun, dun, dun.
It's that eyebrow for me. Oh my gosh. Anyways, we'll see you guys next time on MusicaliTea.
Bye.
Bye.